All right, let's take our hymnals again and turn to hymn number 183. Hymn number 183, Lamb of Glory. Hymn number 183. Let's stand as we sing. Hear the story from God's word, that kings and priests and prophets heard. There would be a sacrifice, and blood would flow to pay sacrifice. Precious Lamb of glory, was this wondrous story. Part of God's redemption of man, worship the Lamb of glory. On the cross, God of the world, while all the powers of hell were, no one there could understand. The one they saw was Christ the Lamb, precious Lamb of glory, was his wondrous story. God of God's redemption of man, worship the Lamb of glory. Please be seated. All right, open your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 7. And we're going to read the chapter together as we begin. It came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the son of Judah, king of Judah, that the Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told the house of David. Now note that phrase, house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved in the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved by the wind. The Lord said to Isaiah, Go forth now to meet Ahaz, and shear Jeshub thy son at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field, and say to him, Take heed, and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin, Syria, and the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, Let us go up against Judah and vex it, and make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeel. Thus saith the Lord God, It shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken and not be a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. And if you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. Okay, so the Ahaz is being told, this is what's going to happen, and you need to believe, you need to trust. Moreover, the Lord said unto Ahaz, so it's not just to the house of David. He's speaking specifically to this king, saying, Ask a sign of the Lord, your God, and ask it either in the depth or in the height above. So ask anything you want in heaven or on earth. And Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, Hear ye now. Now notice the change again. O house of David. Okay, so this is not to Ahaz specifically. It's to the house of David, the kingly line of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you, that's the house of David, a sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and he shall call his name Immanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. Okay? You catch that? You see what's happening? What's the prophecy? These two kings, the king of Samaria and the king of Syria, will both be dead. That's what he's saying. And the Lord will bring upon you and your house and your people and your father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. And it shall come to pass in that day, the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. Or he'll whistle for them, call them. And they shall come and shall rest all of them in the desolate valleys, in the holes of the rocks, and all the thorns and all the bushes. And the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it shall consume the beard. And it shall come to pass in that day that a young man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. And it shall come to pass for the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. So these sheep and the cow are giving him butter, and butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land. Now you think that's good, but actually that's bad. And I'll explain that later. And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings. It shall be for briars and thorns. And what do you get from vines? What do you have on the vines? The grapes. But now it's going to be briars and thorns. And with arrows and bows shall the men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. And all the hills shall be digged with the mattock, and there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and the treading of lesser cattle. Now, one of the sins of youth is the belief that older people are not very intelligent or not very well educated. And I mean, surely someone who cannot work an iPhone cannot be as smart as a child who is naturally drawn to new technology. That's how many young people think. And unless you think you're immune from that, young people, that is kind of your natural bent. And I know that because that was my bent when I was your age. Or as my barber had the sign over the barber's chair, ask your teenager something, well, he still knows everything. And of course, these youth never ask how this technology came to be and are unaware of the incredible advances in technology that came before their time. I'm not really getting on to youth particularly, but I will say that there is this idea that in the last couple of centuries, many young theologians came to the conclusion that the Hebrew word translated virgin in Isaiah 7:14, it's the Hebrew word alma, does not mean virgin, but young woman of a marriageable age. So look at Isaiah 7:14 again. Let's look at the verse. He says, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. And in the last couple hundred years, people have come to the idea that that should be retranslated. The Lord himself shall give you a sign. A young woman shall conceive. And this all came to a head when the Revised Standard Version was first published in 1952. In fact, it was the first part of it was the New Testament published, and it was well received. But then came along the Old Testament, and when the Old Testament was published, it was summarily rejected by most conservatives because of this one verse. In fact, this became the litmus test of all translations. How do you translate Isaiah 7:14? Now, what's interesting about the Revised Standard Version is that it was the first to use the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly the scrolls of Isaiah. And if you search on the internet for the Revised Standard Version, the first thing you're going to find is this controversy. And you find that people looked at this verse and said, nope, this isn't good, we can't have this. Here's how the Revised Standard Version reads. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. We're okay so far, aren't we? A young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. But I want you to understand that this is not new. So just like some people who think, well, we're cutting edge, nobody before was very smart. Let me tell you, there are no liberals today that are inventing new heresies. They're centuries old. And really, all the way almost to the beginning. This controversy goes back all the way into the 2nd century and likely before the 2nd century. We're talking 150 AD. Somewhere in that time frame is when Justin Martyr publishes his book, To Trypho the Jew, or Dialogues with Trypho. And Trypho, whether he was a real person or not, no one fully understands. Maybe Trypho is just kind of a literary device that Justin Martyr was using. I think most of you have heard the name Justin Martyr before. But he's arguing with this person, Trypho, over the translation of this verse. Trypho the Jew is arguing that the word virgin should be young woman. In other words, when the liberals came up with the idea that it should be young woman in the 1800s, it wasn't a brand new argument. It had gone back 1800 years. So what's the answer? How do you translate the verse? Because this is kind of important, don't you think? If we translate it young woman, then that's going to change a lot when we get to the Gospel of Matthew, which is coming up shortly in our study. Because Matthew is going to quote this verse, and he's going to say a virgin. He's going to use a Greek word, parthenos, that means virgin. And there's no other way to read that word. And Matthew is quoting the Bible of Jesus, the Septuagint, quoting the Bible Jesus used. And here are the two arguments against the word virgin in Isaiah 7:14. Okay, here are the two arguments the liberals use. Number one, the idea of a virgin birth is something the followers of Jesus created in order to be accepted because of the pagan gods who were known to have virgin births. Okay, so if you go back into pagan mythology, you find that these pagan gods had virgin births. And so the argument goes is that the Christians came along and said, we have to have a God who was born of a virgin too, so that he'll be accepted by a Gentile audience. Then the argument goes, this is the second one, if Isaiah had meant virgin, then he would have used a word different from Alma. He would have used the Hebrew word Bethulah. Now, I think these arguments are pretty weak, but I want to show you why I believe that. And I have three arguments, okay? Number one, let me give you the linguistic argument. The translation of Alma and Bethulah are not as definite as they may seem. So the argument goes, the second of these two arguments, if Isaiah had wanted to say a virgin will conceive, he would have said a Bethulah will have a child, not an Alma. And the word Alma, they say, means young woman, but Bethulah always means virgin. The argument that Isaiah chose a term that does not naturally mean virgin, and this is one that goes back all the way to Trypho the Jew. Now, let me tell you, that's not a slam dunk argument. In fact, of the 50 uses of Bethulah in the Old Testament, not every one of them refers to a virgin. I want you to turn over to Esther chapter 2. Over in the book of Esther, chapter 2, I want you to look down at verse 19. If you go back to verse 16, Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in the sight more than all the virgins. Okay? All right. Now look at verse 19. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, now that includes Esther. But Esther is not a virgin any longer because she's already part of Ahasuerus' harem. Do you see that? Esther, so the word Bethulah, which is used here in this verse, is not referring to a virgin. It's referring to an innocent woman. And I think that's what the word actually is referring to. It's the idea of innocence. It's the idea of a condition of moral purity, but not necessarily a condition of virginity. In fact, listen to this quote. Alec Motyer writes, 21 cases where the Betula in question would be or assumed to be a virgin. The requirement is in the context, not in the word itself. So the word Betula being used doesn't necessarily mean virgin. But you say, well, what about the word Alma? Because that's the word Isaiah uses. Go back to Isaiah 7. He says a virgin shall conceive, and Alma will conceive. Well, there are 9 uses in the Old Testament. This actually makes it very easy to find out. You can go and you can use your computer and you can find all 9 instances. This is one of them, Isaiah 7:14, and then there's 8 others. 2 of them are used, one in the Psalms, one in Chronicles, as a musical notation. So take those off the table. It has nothing to do with marriage and family and anything. It's a musical notation. I think the root of Alma means secret or concealed, and it's the idea of singing the music in that way. And nobody really knows because we don't fully understand Hebrew music. Okay, we don't know exactly what it sounded like, other than it was probably very rhythmic. So you have those 2 take off. So now you have how many left? You only have 6 instances left. And of those 6 instances, they're all references to young girls who are probably virgins. In fact, you would say that's likely the case. And let's look at a test case, an example of this. Go back to Genesis 24. Now in Genesis 24, we have a reference to Abraham. He's sending out his servant to find a wife for Isaac. Do you remember that story? Okay. He's sending out his servant to find a wife for Isaac. And in Genesis 24, in verse 16, by the way, he uses both words in this story. He uses both Betula and Alma. And notice the way Moses uses the words. So in Genesis 24, in verse 16, well, let's go back to verse 15 so we can pick up the story. It came to pass, before he had done speaking, behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder. So she's a relative of Abraham, right? Her brother is Laban. Now look at verse 16. Look right at the text. And the damsel was very fair to look on, a virgin. That's a Betula, okay? An innocent young woman. And in fact, it explains her innocence in the next phrase. Look at the next phrase. Neither had any man known her. So here it's saying that Rebekah is a virgin, and it's qualifying her innocence by saying, let me explain how innocent she is. She's never been with a man. You see that? So that qualifier is there. But now if you look down, all the way down to verse 43, when the servant is recounting the story of meeting Rebekah, he said, behold, I stand by the well of the water. And it shall come to pass that when the virgin cometh forth to draw water, and I say to her, give me, I pray thee, a little water of thy pitcher to drink. Do you see that? That word virgin is Alma. And there's no qualifying phrase. Now, Moses expects you to understand what he means. In the first case, he's saying the servant is looking for a certain kind of young woman, isn't he? Now, she's a virgin in both cases. But in the first case, he's saying he's looking for an innocent, a pure young woman. But in the second case, he's just making it clear. She is a young woman of marriageable age. Her status. But she's also a virgin. Okay, so it's crystal clear here what he's talking about. She is marriageable and she is unmarried. No way does this servant come back with Rebekah and says, oh, why? She's been married before. Okay, no way is he going to do that. So the key, as I quoted Motyer, what's the key? It's not the word or even its definition. It's the what? It's the context. The context is the key. So that's going to take me to my second argument then. Go back to Isaiah chapter 7. I hope I left my little, and I didn't. I was trying to leave my little piece of silk there in the right spot so I would be able to quickly find it. So back into Isaiah chapter 7, we're going to look at the second argument, which is, I'm going to call it the contextual argument. And I'm going to tell you the story only makes sense if Isaiah is speaking about a virgin birth of Messiah. Now, there are different views about who the woman is. So here we have. You got Ahaz. He's really upset because you've got these two kings that have joined together. They've joined forces, and they're going to attack him. And so Ahaz says, I need some help. And Isaiah goes with Shir Jashub to this particular spot in Jerusalem to meet Ahaz. And then he gives this prophecy. And notice he talks about this woman. In fact, there's a definite article before the word virgin. It means the virgin. Okay? And some people say that definite article is really important. I don't think so. But some people say it's really important. I actually think if you go, there's lots of examples of definite articles that don't mean anything in Hebrew. So I think people who haven't studied Hebrew long enough have come to a wrong conclusion by that. But here is the virgin. Who is the virgin? And some believe Isaiah is referring to his own wife, the prophetess. But the problem is that they're married. She's not a virgin. And she does soon bear a son. But what is the name of the boy supposed to be? A virgin will conceive and bear a son, and you call his name what? Immanuel. But if you look over at chapter 8, here is the greatest name in the history of language for a boy. Do you see it? And for all of you young couples, I encourage you, I plead with you, have a son, name him Maher Shalal Hashbaz, because that's awesome. Imagine him going on to the NBA and having that on his jersey, right? Maher Shalal Hashbaz. That is a great word. And if you do that in Scrabble, you're going to get a lot of points. So she shows up. She has a boy, but his name is not Immanuel. So I think you can scratch her off the list. Some people believe it's Ahaz's wife. And that the little boy is Hezekiah. The problem here is when you study Jewish history, Hezekiah has already been born. Hezekiah is co-regent with his father for 10 years, and then on the back end of his life, he's probably co-regent with Manasseh for a few years. But Hezekiah is already around. By the way, Jerome, Saint Jerome, you know who Jerome is, right? He's the one who came out with the Latin Vulgate. Jerome, actually 200 years after Justin Martyr, picked up on this argument and wrote a whole lot about the fact that Hezekiah was already born. He says this can't possibly be the answer. So it's not Ahaz's wife. It's not Isaiah's wife. Well, there's a third view, and it's a little bit ridiculous. I hate to give it to you, but I have to because it's out there, and it's just any woman. It's not Isaiah's wife. It's not Ahaz's wife. These people say the definite article in Hebrew is meaningless. It's just a woman. We don't know who the woman was, but there was a woman, and she gave birth, and she named her son Immanuel. Well, there's some problems here. It makes the whole conception and birth normal. What kind of sign is that? I mean, think about the great signs of the Old Testament. Give me a great sign of the Old Testament. Burning bush is a good one. What's another one? Oh, the sundial. That's Hezekiah, right? Or what about Gideon and the fleece, right? Those are really good signs. Some woman is going to get pregnant is not a sign, okay? It's not a sign. It doesn't give you anything. Moreover, there's no evidence of any child named Immanuel anywhere in Jewish history before Jesus. And so the idea here is that this is what's happening, to me, doesn't fit the context of the story. Now, Isaiah 7:14 does deal with Messiah. If you look at the story that Isaiah is painting here, he's talking about a servant. In fact, at the very end, he's going to talk about the suffering servant. If you look at chapters 7 through 11, there are three things that Isaiah is presenting about this boy. All three things are there. 7 and 8, we have that he is God with us. He's Immanuel. Chapter 9, what's the one from chapter 9? It's a Christmas one. What's the one from chapter 9? And the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be, just to throw out to our friend, the songwriter, his name shall be Khaled, right? Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. So that was Handel. He was Khaled. But you have here still talking about the same person. And if you're reading through verses chapters 7 through 11, you understand it's not talking about new people. It's still talking about this boy, this child, this future king. And then you get to chapter 11 and it talks about the branch. And the branch is really important because when you get to later prophets like Zechariah, it brings up the story about the branch. So I'm going to tell you that Isaiah 7:14 in context is dealing with God's servant, this coming king. But the immediate context, if we just drill down on these verses themselves, it has to be Messiah. Let me tell you why I believe that. First of all, once you read Isaiah 14, look at the next couple of Isaiah 7:14. Look at the next couple of verses. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest, those two kingdoms that are fighting against you, will be forsaken of both her kings. Both kings are going to die. And the Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house days that have not come from the day of Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. Now, what is he saying? Some people look at this and they go, conservatives, and they go, we're lost. And I understand that feeling. Maybe you're sitting here going, I'm a little lost, Pastor. I understand the feeling. So let me work with you through this. I don't think that this is referring to anyone other than Jesus. I don't believe in double interpretation of prophecy. I don't believe that. Okay? Double fulfillment. If you want, I can give you a book in my office written by Dwight Pentecost. He's with the Lord now, called Things to Come. He's got a good section on why double fulfillment is not a very good hermeneutic. It's not a good way of reading your Bible. So conservatives responding to the liberals came up with this idea that there's an Old Testament fulfillment, an immediate fulfillment, and then a future fulfillment of prophecies. But the problem is when you do that, you start having all sorts of problems. Okay? So I don't believe this is double fulfillment. And I don't believe this is two different children. Now, I used to hold that view. And if I preached on this in the past, I know I preached on this text in the past, and you have pastor, written in your Bible, pastor holds that this is two people. Scratch that out, okay? I was wrong. I don't believe that. See, I'm growing as a person. Isn't that good? I was wrong. I don't believe that. Scratch that out. This is Jesus all the way through. Let me tell you why I believe that's true. First of all, when you read butter and honey, what do you think? What do you naturally think when you read butter and honey? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a good thing, right? That's a bad thing. Okay, that's the first thing you need to understand. The English isn't doing you any help here. Butter and honey's bad. This is the food of the poor people. This is the food of the desolate people. That's all they have to eat is the butter and the honey. Now, butter and honey he's going to eat, and he's going to know to reject what's bad and to choose what's good. The idea is of a little boy who learns what tastes good in his mouth and what doesn't taste good. So if you get milk curds, especially if they sour, is that going to taste good or bad? Bad. But if you get honey in your mouth, does honey go bad? If you have honey that goes bad, bring it to my house, right? I shouldn't eat it, but it is so good. Honey is wonderful. So this little boy is going to be able to put on his tongue, and he's going to be able to say, ooh, I don't like that, or oh, I love it, okay? But it's the food of desolate people. In fact, look over at verse 22, and it's exactly what it says here. Verse 22, it'll come to pass, the abundance of milk that they shall give from these cows, shall he eat butter, and butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land. It's talking about a desolate land. And you say, well, the guy's got a cow and 2 sheep. That's nothing for a farming community. If you're a farmer and your entire livelihood is based on your farm, and all you have is 1 cow and 2 sheep, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. Remember Isaiah's call to ministry? He's sitting there, he sees God, and back in chapter 6, high and lifted up on his throne, and his train filled the temple. You remember that? And the angel goes and grabs a coal off of the altar and brings it and touches Isaiah's lips. Do you remember this? It's just a chapter earlier. And Isaiah says, how long, Lord, should I go and preach? And he says, until the people have completely turned away from me. Isaiah isn't talking about a time here where everything's getting better and better. He's talking about a time where everything's bad. And so this story is talking about desolation. There are the vines in verse 23. In a place where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings, there will be briars and thorns. Instead of vines bearing big, fat, juicy grapes, there's just nothing. Briars and thorns. This is desolation. So I think the context here is one of poverty, not plenty, of a desolated land. And the young boy, before he gets to an age, which will be very soon after birth, we're talking within a year or two of birth, maybe 3. Before he's just a little boy, there are some things that are going to happen. What's going to happen? Look, go back at the verses and look. Okay? The first thing that's going to happen, before this little boy has grown even a couple of years old, the kings will both be dead. Now, how long did it take for Jesus to be born after Isaiah said these words? Give me a round number. Somebody just guess. 700 years. Okay? Not only were those 10 kings dead, their children were dead, their grandchildren were dead, their great-grandchildren were dead. Everybody was dead, right? Isaiah was dead, Ahaz was dead, Hezekiah was dead, Shear-Jashub was dead, the other son was dead, everybody's dead. Okay? But people look at that and go, well, that can't be Jesus because it's so far away. And I'm going to tell you, that's prophecy. That makes perfect sense to me. Before Jesus is 3 years old, those kings will be gone. Well, it took 700 years for Jesus to come, but let me tell you, those kings were gone. Okay? So he's saying, don't worry, kings are going to be gone. Okay? Let's take that off the table. But here's where it becomes even more important. Because we have here a promise of a devastated land. He says, look again at verse 15, or 16, or rather 17. And the Lord shall bring upon you and your people and upon your father's house days that have not come. There's coming desolation. And the first event, he says, is the separation of the southern kingdom from the northern kingdom. Do you remember after David comes Solomon? After Solomon comes who? Who comes after Solomon? Who comes after Solomon? Rehoboam. And Rehoboam he gets his advisors together. Now, what should I do to these people? And the old advisors that were advising Solomon said, go easy on the people and they'll love you. But what does the young man do? He listens to his friends and they say, no, raise taxes, make things hard. Doesn't matter, you're king, be the king. Take control. Well, he does that, and 10 of the 12 Jewish tribes look at him and say, what do we have to do with you, O house of David? We don't want anything to do with you, and they leave. That's exactly what he's talking about here. From the time that Ephraim is the tribe that represents the northern kingdom, from the time that Ephraim left, back in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 20, from the time that Ephraim left, days are going to come that are going to be worse than that day. When the house of David was 12 tribes, now the house of David is just 2 tribes. Even the king of Assyria. Now, what are the Assyrians going to do? They're going to destroy the northern kingdom, and they're going to try to destroy the southern kingdom. And their first shot at it, they're going to reduce Hezekiah down to just 5 cities, or maybe even 2 cities. And some people think just Jerusalem, because archaeologists have dug up an obelisk, and on the obelisk, actually it's a stela, so it looks like a tablet. But on the tablet is a statement by the king of the Assyrians, Sennacherib, who says, I have caged up Hezekiah like a bird. I put him in a bird cage. That day is coming. So he's talking about this. This is all going to happen before the little boy can know the difference between butter and honey, curds and honey. Before that happens, this is what's going to happen. The 2 kings are going to die. The land is going to be left desolate. And a trial is going to come worse than when the kingdom was taken from the house of David. Now, you start looking through history, and who comes after the Assyrians? Who comes? Who comes after the Assyrians? World history. Who's the head of gold in Daniel? Who's that? That's Nebuchadnezzar. Those are the Babylonians. And then who comes after that? Kind of work down through that. You remember that statue? Who came after that? The Medo-Persian Empire. Okay? That's Cyrus and Darius. And who came after that? That's the Greeks. That's if you then relate it to the animals, that's the leopard, right, with the wings. And he divides into 4 parts, and that's obviously Alexander the Great. He divides into 4 parts. And then after that comes the beast. And who's the beast? Rome. And that's the most likely interpretation. Rome. Now you read through this, prophet says, disaster is coming unlike you've ever seen before. And before Jesus comes, the 2 kings will die. That's a good thing. But this is a sign of judgment. The 2 kings are going to be gone, but then desolation is going to come upon the house of David all the way down till it's smashed and ground down to almost nothing. Almost nothing. Now, when Jesus is born in Bethlehem, how many men are left of the line of David? Anybody want to take a wild guess? Probably 1. Joseph. Solomon, after him, is a superpower. Solomon is like the President of the United States living today, the most important person on the earth. The President of our country is the most important person on the earth today. Okay? That's Solomon. Solomon's family line, all the way down. Least important person. What is Joseph? He's a carpenter. He's a fix-it man. He's the guy you call when you lock your keys in your car. He's just not very important at all. And probably the whole line has been reduced just down to 1. That's the prophecy Isaiah is giving. It's not a positive thing at all. It's not a, hey, Ahaz, be encouraged by this sign, kind of like the golden fleece, kind of like the sundial going back, even like the burning bush. It's not a positive sign at all. This is a sign of coming judgment. Judgment is coming upon you, and it is going to be total and complete all the way down to the nub. But remember what Isaiah says? A root will come out of the dry ground. Right? Out of a place where you would never expect it. Because the plant has been cut all the way level with the ground. It looks dead. The ground around it is dry. But out of that will come a shoot. Out of Jesse's loins. Davidic. And that will be Jesus. So let me finish then by addressing the final argument, which is the Jewish argument. So if you understand the context of what's being said here, you understand the linguistic argument, saying Alma certainly can refer to a virgin, and it looks like this is what Isaiah is arguing in his story, then let's address finally this idea that the Jews who interpreted the Bible and translated the Bible 300 years before Jesus and 400 years after Isaiah didn't know what they were talking about, because that's what you have to believe. I want you to think about this for a moment. You remember my 2 arguments? The ones I gave way back at the beginning? Let me refresh your thinking. The second of the argument was if Isaiah had meant virgin, he would have used the word Betula and not Alma. But the first one was, if the virgin birth is something the followers of Jesus created in order to be accepted because pagan gods had virgin births. Here's the problem with that argument. The Jews who utilized the Septuagint were not interested in presenting a Messiah in the context of a pagan deity. They weren't presenting a Messiah that looks like a pagan deity at all. And I would say first, they weren't Christian sympathizers. And I know this, first of all, because the Septuagint was translated 300 years before Christ. There is no Christianity when the Septuagint was first translated. Now, why is that important? Because they are translating the Hebrew Old Testament, they're translating the word Alma into Greek, and they choose the word Parthenos, which means virgin. Let me just tell you, that seals the deal in my mind. I think people today, living today, who say, oh, Isaiah, he used Alma and not Betula. If he really had meant virgin, he would have used Betula. What we're saying is this: we know better than all those old people living back then. We know Hebrew today better than people who lived when Hebrew was still being used in everyday speech. Let me tell you, that's ridiculous. We don't even know what Hebrew sounds like because all the vowel pointings were made up. And what year was it, Joe? Was it 1100, 700 AD? They made up the Hebrew vowel pointings. Do you remember? It wasn't that far long ago. Okay, so when you read Hebrew, you've got all these weird looking letters. Lamed looks like the weird state of Texas, and Aleph looks like the face of a buffalo. You've got these weird looking letters, and then underneath them you've got these little dots and squiggly lines. Okay, those are the vowel pointings. That lets you know whether it sounds like ah or or e or o. You've got a holum vav, so it looks kind of like this with a little dot, and it's an o sound. 800 AD is when we get the vowel pointings. Now, we assume that at 800 AD they still knew what Hebrew sounded like, but we don't know that for sure. We don't know that the Masoretes fully knew what Hebrew sounded like in Jesus' day, or even before Jesus' day. So we're guessing, when we say Jehovah, we're guessing that the o, ah is the right vowel sounds. But we really don't know for sure. This is all a guess. And so people living today are saying, you know what, all you people living back in 300 BC, you didn't know Hebrew nearly as well as we know it today. That's ridiculous. If you're living in that day and you're translating from Hebrew into Greek and you speak both Hebrew and Greek, don't you think you would get the right word? I think you would. I think you would. There's no Christianity with which to sympathize. They're not writing the word Parthenos because they're trying to promote a virgin birth of Christ. They're writing the word Parthenos because, as Greek-speaking Hebrews, that's the word they wanted to use. And thus, virgin is not a Gentile Christian translation. It's a Jewish one. It's a Jewish translation. They're not trying to placate the Gentiles. If you know how the Jews were in 300 BC, they didn't love the Gentiles at all. And they had no interest in Gentiles becoming Christians or followers of God. And the Jews were certainly not interested in Messiah being anything like pagan gods. I think this is one reason why the Jews look at the Old Testament today and they see all the passages of Messiah, and this is not one they include because they do not want Jesus attached to any kind of virgin birth because they don't want him compared to pagan gods. Now, what am I telling you? Let's draw this to a conclusion. Let's put a little bow on it. We'll be done. Okay? Number one, the linguistic context, the linguistic argument. The word Alma and the word Bethula have overlapping meanings. Both can be virgin. Both can mean not virgin. But it clearly seems like this is the right word for this context. Number two, the story itself lends itself to the idea that the promise is of Messiah, that he would be born of a virgin. And number three, the Jews who translated this passage into Greek, using the word Parthenos, as we'll look at when we get to Matthew's Gospel, they translate this word into Greek, know the language in which they're translated. So when I read, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, you know what I think? Christmas. This is all about Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for our time together tonight around your word. I hope this has been valuable for all of us.